Okay, so I have a little bit of time. I want to talk about stress and stress as a habit. And it's really cool because if you spend time with a toddler or a young kid, you can see how they go through periods of frustration, and moments where they, get frustrated or they have an emotional point, um, or an emotional thing that they're walking through, but they tend to get over it very quickly. Most stable kids, if you spend time with them, it's like they might fall down, they get hurt or something, and then they can jump right back into playing really quickly. Or they might get frustrated, when you tell them no or something like that, like no, you don't want them to do something, but they tend to bounce back pretty quickly. And a lot of people see that as irrational, right? Like, oh, they're just shifting from one thing to the next. But the reality is, kids don't really have stress in that same way that adults do as an accumulation. That's why they can play so easily. It's why they can just have fun, and why when you're around adults, what you'll notice, especially when you see adults with kids, it's very difficult to get the adults to loosen up and just play and have fun. And the reason for that is because we all have developed a pattern, a habit of stress over time that literally creates like a pressure and a locking down of our physical body. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to give you some definitions, because it's also what I want to do here is explain stress and habit in the most simple sense, in the most simple vocabulary possible, because it's a really cool point to start. And there's so much information and so much you can do to start supporting yourself to remove stress from your life in a real fundamental way, where it doesn't just, for a week, maybe you can reduce your stress, but then it just compounds and gets worse. And I'm sure you can see for yourself like that cycle, where you might find something like yoga or running or exercise or something like that that helps you reduce stress for a little bit of time, but then it just comes right back. And that requires a little bit of self-honesty for all of us to really look and see and start to investigate what are the sources of stress, and how do I actually start to reduce this from my life. So let's talk about stress. I want to read some definitions. So stress, the psychological definition of stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or suspense. So you can understand what that means. But I really want to look, is really cool to look at, if you've studied physics, the definition of stress in physics. I'll just go ahead and read it. Force that produces strain on a physical body. So stress is actually something that you compound physically. It's not just a mental state. You're actually doing something to your physical body. And we all know this, because if you're self-aware enough to consider and look at what you're going through when you're experiencing stress, you experience a lot of physical, you could call it movement, you could call it pressure, you might feel it in your solar plexus, you might feel it in your stomach. You feel physically stressed. So you're actually doing something to your physical body when you get stressed. And then, okay, so how do we create like this sort of pattern of stress, right? Why is it coming up so often in our lives as adults? The reason for that is because throughout our whole life, we've developed a habit of going into stress, right? Of participating in this strain that we're putting on our physical body over time, to the point where as adults, we are not even fully aware of the fact that we're existing basically in stress all the time. Another thing I want to point out is that the stuff I'm talking about today in terms of how to support yourself to start to walk out of stress, this is for people who are in a situation where they can watch this video in a certain level of comfort, in the sense that you're not worried about your survival in the sense of you're not starving today. Like you're not worried about getting clean water and having access to a bathroom and access to a home. You're not living in poverty, right? You're living for people in that situation. There's a different way of supporting those types of people, which is like they need to have those basic needs met. So we can't project a lot of the solutions that I'm talking about here in terms of how you can support yourself onto people who are dealing with total, like they're living in abject poverty. They don't have the ability to do the things that I'm talking about in this video, but you do in most cases, right? Unless you've experienced like massive trauma in your life and you kind of still existing in that state, which can exist like as the poverty mindset within you, right? But if you're able to watch this video, these things that I'm talking about today apply to you in the sense of you can start to walk yourself out of this constant state of stress by doing the things that I'm going to talk about right now. Okay, so another thing to consider, okay, stress is accumulated over time. It's a habit that we've developed, that we've built in to our subconscious and unconscious, right? But how do we do that? And before we get into that though, I just want to be clear on what habit means, because a lot of us have words that we use, but we don't clarify with each other what we mean by those words, right? So let's just read the definition of the word habit. Habit is an automatic pattern of behavior in reaction to a specific situation. It may be inherited or acquired through frequent repetition. This is very important because habits, right, can be, I love that, it can be inherited, right? So you actually just absorb it from your parents, from your environment as a child, and then also it could be something that you're developing for yourself over time. And a lot of habits, even that we've downloaded from our parents, like very quickly, and you can see this in young children, how quickly they will absorb a habit, absorb a pattern of behavior. It happens so quick, it can happen in a moment. And that's why it's really important for parents to start to stabilize themselves, especially when they're interacting with their kids, because your kid, they don't necessarily just do things slowly over time. A lot of times they'll just take on what you're doing, your behavior, and then just immediately start doing it, right? So in the simplest of terms, so that everyone can understand, how do you start to stress? So what will happen is, and you'll see this the more you become self-aware, and we'll kind of go over some examples, is you have a thought that you participate in, okay? Let's give an example, okay? So you have a thought, like you see your house kind of disorganized, right? You come down in the morning, you see something you didn't clean up from the night before, let's say like the dishes or something in the sink, and you have a thought of like, oh, my house is dirty, or the house is a mess, okay? Then there will be a point within you where you accept that thought as true, as something that you're now going to then accept. Like instead of just breathing and cleaning the dishes, right, and just making a physical movement so that that issue can be corrected, or that thought or whatever it is, that observation can be done and taken care of, you participate in the thought of this house is a mess, and that comes with a bunch of other thoughts like, oh, I'm gonna have to clean all this stuff up, right? And what'll happen is you'll notice within you start to generate energy around that thought, and around the the sequence of thoughts that come after that initial thought. So you'll feel it in your body. You start to feel pressure. You start to feel yourself eating away, right? That's a good way to describe it. Eating away at your physical body by participating in this line of thinking. And then so you'll feel it, you'll have the physical feeling, and then you'll get to this point where you have the emotion of like anger, and it's like it's almost like something you can't get through. You can't think at that point. You can't even, you're just possessed by this point of emotion, like this frustration, this anger, and to the point where, you know, instead of just making that physical movement to take care of whatever it is that needed to be taken care of, you're now in this point where you're really frustrated, and you're using that to lead you to act. Either you'll go angrily do the dishes, or you'll yell at somebody in the household for not doing the dishes. You start blaming in your mind, in this sequence of thoughts, the other people around you, or you'll start blaming yourself and getting angry with yourself about all of that. And you compound this in your physical body. And the more self-aware you are, the more you'll actually be able to feel it in your physical body. And for some of us, it's like so many patterns, or this whole process of going from thought to feeling to emotion is so automated within us that a lot of times it's very difficult to actually be aware of it, right? And that's why we have to support ourselves. When we understand the pattern of how this occurs and what actually to look for and flag for ourselves as feelings within our physical body, we can start to identify and support ourselves to deal with the thoughts that are coming up. So there's so many good ways to deal with this, but the most basic thing that you can do for like free today is to start to watch how all of this occurs. So the best thing to do is like when you wake up in the morning, what's the first thought that you have, right? And you can start writing these things down and supporting yourself. Okay, like what's the first thing that comes up? If I'm stressed about money, this is a really good one. Everyone stresses about money, right? Look at, okay, all right, if I'm stressed about money, like if I wake up in the morning and I go, oh man, there's no money in my account or something like that, that leads to like, I can't buy food, I can't move around, I can't be flexible, I can't have freedom. Look at all the thoughts that come up that are, each of those thoughts are generating more and more stress and anxiety as a physical feeling within you that then lead to the emotion like anger, frustration, okay? And what's really interesting, I don't know if I want to go into this, but like because I'm explaining it on a most basic level for people who are not really necessarily diving all into this yet. But what's actually really interesting is you'll go through that anger and frustration so much that you need some sort of positive emotion to cycle back into in order to get out of this very like sort of nasty feeling of anger and frustration within you. So you'll just loop into that. But it always, what you'll notice is whenever the majority of us mostly deal with this negative emotion. It's negative in the sense of like anger, frustration. That's how we would identify that, right? And we'll sometimes swing into the positive. Even the most positive people, this is going on within them, because this is how it works. Like you'll see this for everyone, right? All of us swing into that negative emotion. That's how the mind operates. It's how we've abused our ability to think, which is actually a really cool tool that we have. Like the initial thought of, hey, there's some dishes here that are dirty. That's a really cool tool that we have to then guide us into what we need to do in our world to keep things organized, to reduce chaos in a certain sense, and to actually look at how to function on in our daily life, on our day-to-day basis, right? But we abuse that by then using it to create this feeling and this energy within us. And the consequence of that is that we're going to experience stress because we do this on a daily basis over time, right? To the point where it's a habit in the sense that it's unconscious. It's not something that we're taking self-directive control over anymore. It seems like it just comes up automatically and we don't know where it's coming from, right? So, and a really cool point to consider, because we have a lot of talk in our world about anxiety and, we're taking a lot of anti-anxiety medication in our environment, and even the best psychologists, right, are dealing with anxiety. Like you can see what Jordan Peterson is walking through right now, which if you go and read his story, you can see a lot of that. Like he still has issues with anxiety. So a lot of people are not understanding this process of how anxiety develops, how it comes from that the habit that you've participated in over time of creating physical stress on yourself, right? So understanding that, you can support yourself to walk out of it. And I actually don't have time right now. I have to go into a chat right now to like dive into more how to deal with the how to reduce the pattern of stress. But this is something that I've been walking with myself for 10 years, and I can definitely see how you can actually start to reduce this pattern by becoming more aware of it and then using the tools that you have to identify the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that you go through, and not be afraid of really diving into the fact that you exist a lot in negative emotion, and that's where a lot of your positive emotions come from, like this whole roller coaster ride of emotions. And instead just look at, okay, what do you really want? You'd like to be able to be stable and walk into any situation without feeling this point of pressure and stress within you. And you'd like to be able to make decisions that are best for you and best for your children. You'd like to not constantly have this back chat about your kids and the people around you. And you don't want to have a feeling directing who you are and how you act and how you speak and whether you can speak or not, because a lot of people who go through extreme anxiety can't even speak effectively in situations. You're just totally trapped by this physical compounding that you've done to yourself over time. So anyways, I'm gonna stop it for today because I just wanted to give a basic understanding for a lot of people who maybe just jumping into the idea of like, what is stress? How do I deal with it? What is it even? So I wanted to get into a little bit of that, and I'll make another video talking a little bit more about what the process that I've walked through over time to really dive into what is my personal stress. And so I can give some more examples of that, but I have to go to a chat now. So I will talk to you guys later. Okay, bye.